Planet Reddit, today's story is...
My mother threw me out of the house when I was 16 for having a boyfriend. Now she's demanding that I give my lake house to my pregnant sister, and they tried to break in. I was barely 16 when my mother threw me out of the house. It wasn't for doing drugs, or for stealing, or anything like that. It was simply for having a boyfriend. I vividly remember the night she found out. She was furious, screaming about how I was an embarrassment and how I was going to disgrace our family. I tried to reason with her, to explain that it wasn't serious, but she refused to listen. She hastily packed my suitcase, put it in my hands and told me to fend for myself, as apparently she believed I was old enough. At the time, my options were limited. I stayed on a friend's sofa for several weeks, while I continued to attend school and started working in a restaurant. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't easy, but it kept me afloat. I worked double shifts, saved every penny I could, and finally got my diploma. It was years of struggle and sacrifice, but I managed to get by. By the time I was 28, I had a stable job in the financial sector and enough savings to buy something I had always dreamed of, a small vacation home by the lake. That house represented much more than just a property to me. It was a symbol of everything I had endured and overcome. It wasn't huge or luxurious, but it was completely mine. I would spend weekends there, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, feeling like I had finally achieved some peace in my life. My younger sister, Lisa, was always the favorite. She was the apple of my mother's eye, the one she could never get wrong. When she became pregnant during her second year of college, my mother's reaction was completely different from when I simply had a boyfriend. Instead of indignation, she showed empathy. Yes, Lisa had made a mistake, but she was just a young girl. Mom welcomed her home with open arms and put everything aside to help her. Lisa's boyfriend, Danny, was not exactly a catch. He didn't work, he lacked ambition, and was content to live off Lisa and my mother. However, Mom loved to talk about how they were going to get ahead together and how her baby would bring the family even closer together. 4 years, I let these differences in treatment slide. I didn't visit often, but I still sent gifts for birthdays and holidays. I tried to maintain some kind of connection, even though every conversation with Mom seemed like a subtle reminder that I wasn't as important as Lisa. The call came on a Sunday morning while I was enjoying my coffee at the lake house. I knew immediately that something was wrong when I saw Mom's name on the screen. She never called unless she needed something. She started with small talk, asking how I was and what I had been up to lately. But it didn't take her long to get to the point. Lisa and Danny were getting married, and they needed a place to live. I asked her why she was telling me this, and that's when she let slip what she really wanted. She wanted me to give them my lake house as a wedding present. He argued that they needed a boost, and that my house would be perfect for raising the baby. He went on to talk about how they couldn't afford to rent a decent place, and how Danny was really trying to find work. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him clearly that the house was not available. I explained that I had worked hard to buy it, and that it meant a lot to me. He didn't care at all. She replied that I was being selfish, and that the family should support each other. She reminded me that Lisa had a baby to think about while I had no children. Therefore, according to her, I didn't need the house as much as they did. I asked her where all that concern for the family had been when I was 16 and became homeless. Her response was that it had been different because I had brought it on myself. The conversation escalated quickly. She accused me of holding a grudge and said I was punishing Lisa for something that wasn't her fault. I replied that Lisa's decisions were her own responsibility. I wasn't going to sacrifice my hard-won stability for her mistakes. At the end of the call, Mom was shouting, saying she couldn't believe how insensitive I had become. She hung up, but not before telling me she hoped I would reconsider my position. I told her I wouldn't. Over the next few days, I started receiving messages from Lisa. She said she couldn't believe I was so cruel and that I was basically condemning her child to a life of poverty. Danny also weighed in, sending me a long message about how he had always looked up to me and hoped I could see the bigger picture. I replied that I couldn't believe how unfair they were being by bringing a child into the world in their current situation, and that I was barely considering having one myself. It was almost laughable how they were trying to make me feel guilty so that I would give up my home. But I wasn't laughing, I was furious. The last straw was when Mum sent me a long message detailing all the reasons why I owed this to Lisa. She talked about how I was the successful one, how I had more than enough, and how Lisa just needed a little help to get back on track. I knew that anything I said would only make the situation worse. But I also knew that this wouldn't be the end of it. Neither Mom nor Lisa were the type to take no for an answer. Update 1. I thought the calls and messages were bad, but they were nothing compared to what happened next. Her next move took things to a whole new level. I had just finished a long day at work. I was looking forward to going to the lake house for the weekend to relax and clear my head after all the drama with Mom and Lisa. When my phone vibrated, I almost ignored it, but something told me I should check it. It was a notification from my home security app, informing me that there had been movement on the property. I opened the live stream and felt my stomach drop. Lisa and Danny were on my porch, tampering with the door. I could see Danny holding a crowbar, trying to force the lock open, while Lisa stood behind him, nervously looking around. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My hands were shaking as I called the local police department. I explained the situation and asked them to send someone immediately. The operator assured me that officers were on their way, but those few minutes felt like hours. As I watched them through the camera, I could faintly hear their voices on the transmission. Lisa urged Danny to hurry up, saying they couldn't be discovered. Danny snapped back at her, saying it was her fault they had to do this because she hadn't managed to convince me to hand over the house. When the police arrived, Lisa and Danny panicked. They tried to run away, but it was too late. The officers detained them and questioned them right there on the porch. I could hear Lisa sobbing, telling the officers that it was all a misunderstanding and that she thought she had permission to be there. I provided the officers with access to the security footage, which clearly showed Danny trying to break in. They ended up arresting him for attempted burglary, and Lisa was arrested as an accomplice. The whole incident left me shocked. I couldn't comprehend how far they were willing to go. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the absolute lack of respect for me and everything I had worked for. The next day, my mom called me in a rage. She said I had completely overreacted by involving the police, and that I should have taken it more lightly because, in her words, they were just kids. I replied that kids shouldn't be having kids or breaking into people's houses. I reminded her that Lisa was an adult woman, a mother-to-be, and someone who was about to get married. I asked her how much longer she was going to keep justifying her. Mom didn't like my answer and accused me again of being insensitive, adding that if I really cared about the family, I wouldn't have escalated the situation. I told her that it was Lisa and Danny who escalated things by trying to break into my house. I told her that since she liked to use the family argument so much, she should reconsider calling me family because she had excluded me a long time ago. The conversation ended with Mom hanging up on me again. I was used to that by now. Update 2. The consequences of the break-in attempt were worse than I expected. Lisa stopped calling and texting, which I honestly appreciated. But Mom stepped up her efforts. She started calling every day, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful pleas to uncontrolled rage. At one point, she even showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, she launched straight into a speech about how I was destroying the family. She said Lisa was devastated, Danny was humiliated, and that I was the only one who could fix things. She begged me to drop the charges against Danny and Lisa and let them have the house. I told her I wasn't going to drop anything and that the house was out of the question. I added that I was tired of being the scapegoat for her bad decisions. It was then that she played her most important card. She said that if I didn't do this for Lisa, I would regret it for the rest of my life. She said that the family was the only thing we had, and once it was lost forever. Her words affected me more than I expected, and for a brief moment I wondered if I was being too harsh. But then I remembered everything she had been through. Being expelled at the age of 16, struggling to build a life from scratch, and never receiving help from anyone. I asked her if she had ever regretted throwing me out at 16, because she certainly didn't look like she had. She started to stutter. I told Mom that the family worked both ways, and that I wasn't going to sacrifice myself for people who had never been there for me. She looked at me as if I had slapped her. Without saying another word, she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. After she left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I knew I had done the right thing, but it was still difficult to face her like that. Later that night, I received a text message from Lisa. It was brief and to the point. "You've ruined my life." I didn't reply. I knew it was pointless. But then I was tempted and I replied, "You're ruining the child's life. Give him up for adoption." Even I knew how to play the blame game. Over the next few days, I focused on myself. I spent more time at the lake house trying to find peace in the quiet and solitude. But the nagging feeling that this wasn't over kept coming back. Update 3. Sure enough, Mom and Lisa had one last trick up their sleeves, and it was something I never saw coming. I thought the break-in incident and Mom's dramatic visit had been the culmination of this disaster, but I was wrong. Just when I thought I had some peace and quiet, Lisa and Danny managed to take things to a new low. It all started with a series of posts on social media. Lisa took to her accounts to portray me as the villain in this whole situation. She wrote about how I was hoarding a vacation home while she, a struggling mother-to-be, was on the verge of homelessness. She conveniently omitted the part about the attempted break-in, their arrest, and how Mom had bailed them out. The posts were heavy on the melodrama. She shared photos of herself looking tearful, standing in front of a small apartment, and captions pleading for sympathy. She said she couldn't believe her own sister had turned her back on her during such a critical time. The reactions were mixed. Some people, mainly mutual acquaintances, criticized her for airing family matters online, but others, her friends, Danny's friends, and even distant relatives, quickly came to her defense. They said things like, families should support each other no matter what, and that I should be ashamed of myself. Mom wasn't subtle about her position. She weighed in on Lisa's posts, supporting her and saying she couldn't believe how insensitive I had become. At first I ignored it. I figured that people who knew the truth wouldn't buy Lisa's sob story, and those who didn't know weren't my problem. But then Lisa crossed a line. She posted a photograph of my lake house with a caption that read something like, "This is the house my selfish sister is keeping for herself while I struggle to keep a roof over my head." The photo had clearly been taken just before they were arrested. It was of poor quality, but the house was unmistakable. I realized with a sick feeling that Lisa must have taken it during the attempted break-in. The comments exploded. People started speculating about where the house was and how much it was worth. Some even joked about turning up there themselves to claim it for Lisa. That's when I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I contacted a lawyer to see what my options were. He advised me to file a restraining order against Lisa and Danny, citing the break-in and the social media harassment. He also suggested sending a cease and desist letter to Lisa to remove the posts. The restraining order was quickly granted, given the evidence I had, but the damage was already done. I felt like my privacy had been violated in the worst way, and it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about protecting myself from people who clearly had no boundaries. After the restraining order was issued, Lisa finally stopped posting about me online, but that didn't mean the drama was over. Instead, Mom decided to take matters into her own hands. She showed up at my lake house, unannounced, on a Saturday morning. I was outside, tending the garden when I heard her car arrive. I hadn't invited her, and I certainly didn't want to deal with her. But I knew that ignoring her would only make things worse. Mom wasted no time getting straight to the point. She said she was there to talk some sense into me. Because, in her words, I had destroyed my relationship with Lisa and ruined the family's reputation. She launched into a long speech about how the family should stick together, how Lisa was struggling, and how I had turned my back on her when she needed me most. She said I was being selfish, hoarding my success while Lisa was sinking. I let her talk for a while, mainly because I needed time to collect my thoughts. When she finally paused for breath, I told her I wasn't going to apologize for protecting what was mine. I reminded her that Lisa had tried to break into my house, that she and Danny had been arrested, that Lisa had publicly humiliated me online, and that she had supported them. I asked her how any of that was supposed to make me inclined to help them. Mom dismissed it as no big deal. She said Lisa was just desperate and didn't know what else to do. She added that I should understand, because after all, I was young and reckless once too. That was the last straw. I told Mom that there was a big difference between being young and making mistakes and being an adult who refuses to take responsibility for their actions. I reminded her that when I was Lisa's age, I didn't get any help or sympathy. I was kicked out of the house for having a boyfriend. Mom tried to interrupt me, but I wouldn't let her. I told her that for years, I had worked hard to build a life for myself without anyone's help. I wasn't going to let Lisa and Danny take that away from me just because they couldn't get their act together. The conversation quickly turned heated. Mom accused me of being bitter and holding grudges. She said I was punishing Lisa for something that had happened years ago, and that I needed to let it go for the good of the family. I replied that this was not the case at all. I said that I was simply standing up for myself for the first time in my life, and that if she and Lisa couldn't handle it, it was their problem, not mine. I suggested that she should kick Lisa out or give her her house since she was such a devoted mother. Mom left in a rage, but as she drove away, I felt relief. In the days that followed, I heard nothing from Mom or Lisa, which was a welcome change. I focused on getting back to my normal routine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. Update 4. I sat down at my desk, staring at the blank screen. A storm of emotions raged inside me. Anger, frustration, sadness, and above all, exhaustion. Mom and Lisa had distorted the narrative so much that mutual acquaintances had started to contact me, urging me to reconsider my decision. Some of their messages were downright cruel. It became clear that remaining silent was no longer an option. If they wanted to portray me as the villain, I had every right to tell the truth. With a deep sigh, I began to write, setting out everything as clearly and honestly as I could. I started from the beginning, explaining how I had been thrown out of the house at the age of 16 for the crime of having a boyfriend. I described the years I spent struggling to make ends meet, working late while finishing high school, and, finally, building the career that allowed me to save for the lake house. Then I turned my attention to Lisa. I revealed how she had become pregnant at university, dropped out and returned home to her boyfriend, Danny, who had no job and no intention of finding one. I related how they had repeatedly asked for help, first from Mom and then from me, despite having done nothing to earn my trust or respect. Finally, I addressed the breaking point, his attempt to break into my vacation home. I described the situation, the sheer audacity of his actions, and how Mom had dismissed it as youthful recklessness. To make it absolutely clear, I added that the lake house was mine and mine alone, bought with my hard-earned money after years of sacrifice. I wrote that I had no obligation, legal, moral, or otherwise, to hand it over to anyone, especially not to people who had treated me as little more than a safety net. I read the post 3 times before hitting the publish button. It was direct, but not cruel. It was objective, but not devoid of emotion. I wasn't looking for sympathy, I just wanted to set the record straight. Within minutes, the post started to gain attention. Comments started to pour in, and for the first time I felt a sense of validation. Strangers were expressing their support, condemning the manipulative behavior and sense of entitlement I had endured. Some people shared their own similar experiences with toxic family dynamics, while others offered advice or words of encouragement. Some asked why I hadn't cut off contact before, and honestly, I didn't have a good answer. Maybe I had kept hoping that things would improve. Maybe I had been afraid of the consequences. But now, as I watched the truth spread, I felt lighter. Of course, not everyone was understanding. Some family members suggested that I should have kept the matter private. I told them that if they didn't shut up, I would publish the messages they had sent me next. Part of me felt a pang of guilt, but then I remembered how publicly Lisa and Mom had campaigned against me. They had chosen to involve others and use half-truths and outright lies against me. I was simply defending myself. The consequences were swift. Lisa was the first to react. She flooded my phone with angry messages, accusing me of ruining her reputation and endangering her future and Danny's. I wondered what future. Mom wasn't far behind, her messages less angry and more pleading. She begged me to take down the post, claiming it would humiliate the family and create a rift that could not be repaired. I told her that just because I had kept quiet, they had gone and done all this to me. I warned her that if they attacked me again, I wouldn't hold back. Later that night, I got a call from a mutual friend who had seen the post. She told me that Lisa and Danny were in a panic. Danny was threatening to sue me for defamation. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. Everything I had written was true, and I had the screenshots to prove it. But what money would he sue me with anyway? As I went to bed that night, I felt a sense of peace. You were all right. I should no longer be an easy target. Update 5. It was late at night when my phone rang, Lisa's name flashing on the screen. For a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I picked up, ready for whatever barrage of accusations she might hurl at me. I had the recorder on. Instead, what I heard were sobs. Not her usual manipulative tears, but a deep, heart-wrenching crying that made me pause. Before I could even ask, Lisa started to speak, or rather to lament. Danny had finished with her. He had packed his things and left, blaming her for everything. The negative reaction to my publication, her lack of stability, and the increasing pressure of their upcoming wedding. She said he had told her she was toxic and that he couldn't stand her anymore. Her words were interrupted by hiccups and gasps as she kept repeating the same thing. She said she didn't know what to do. She was scared and alone and didn't think she could handle raising a child on her own. For a fleeting moment I almost felt sorry for her, but then the anger resurfaced, bubbling up with an intensity that surprised even me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, but the words came out sharp and cold. I told her she had no one to blame but herself. She had chosen to bring a baby into the world without any plan, without thinking about the consequences, and with a man who was clearly incapable of being a supportive partner. I asked her what she had been thinking, if she really believed that Danny, who couldn't hold down a job or take responsibility for himself, was going to magically transform into a reliable husband and father. She tried to interrupt me, but I wasn't finished. I reminded her that she had spent weeks attacking me, trying to make me feel guilty, so that I would hand over something that I had worked tirelessly for. I asked her if she had been in her right mind when she decided to break into my house, when she was there with Danny and thought it was acceptable to try to take what wasn't hers. By now, her sobbing had subsided, replaced by an almost stunned silence, but I wasn't finished. I told her that life wasn't a fairy tale where everyone else fixes your mistakes. I asked her how she planned to look after a child when she couldn't even look after herself. Did she think that mom was going to show up and solve all her problems? Or did she still cling to the illusion that I would come to her rescue despite everything she had put me through? Finally, she found her voice, weak and trembling, accusing me of being cold as a stone. She said that I didn't understand how difficult her life was and how much pressure she was under. I couldn't help but laugh. I told her that I knew exactly how difficult life could be because I had lived it. I firmly reminded her how I had been thrown out at the age of 16, left to fend for myself with no safety net, no one to call for help. I told her that the difference between us was that I had taken responsibility for my life and done something with it, while she had spent her life blaming everyone else for her mistakes. The line went silent again, but this time I didn't wait for a reply. I had said all I needed to say. With a final, forceful comment about how it was time for her to grow up, I hung up the phone and let out a long, shaky sigh. I felt no guilt, no lingering doubts. Lisa had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. It wasn't my job to fix her life, and I wasn't going to apologize. Update 6. I was about to relax for the night when the doorbell rang. Glancing at the clock, I frowned. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, my stomach sank. It was Mom. With a sigh, I opened the door but didn't step aside to let her in. There she was, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen her. Her eyes scanned the room, as if she were rehearsing what to say. I crossed my arms and waited, but before she could utter a single word, I stopped her. "If you're here to lecture me about Lisa or beg me to clean up her mess," I said. "Save your breath." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, clearly taken by surprise, but I didn't let her recover. I lashed out at her with everything I had been holding in for years that I told her that she had been the worst mother I could have imagined. I asked her how she could have thrown me out at the age of 16 for something as trivial as having a boyfriend, throwing me to the wolves without thinking twice. I asked her how she could sleep at night, knowing that she had left me to fend for myself as a teenager while Lisa was given opportunity after opportunity to make mistakes without consequences. Her hands were shaking, and she tried to stammer an excuse about being under stress at the time, but I cut her off. I told her that being stressed did not give her the right to abandon one daughter while coddling another to the point of encouraging her bad behavior. That I pointed out how she had spent years bending over backwards for Lisa, always cleaning up her messes, and now she had the nerve to show up at my door expecting me to do the same. I saw her flinch when my voice rose. I told her that I was no longer going to be the scapegoat of the family, and if she thought she could make me feel guilty, She was completely wrong. Finally, she found her voice, albeit a trembling one, trying to say that I was being unfair, that I had made mistakes, but that I was only trying to keep the family together. I laughed bitterly and told her that if she wanted to keep the family together, she should have started by treating her children equally instead of making me the villain while painting Lisa as the helpless victim. Her face fell, but I felt no compassion. I told her that this was her mess to deal with, not mine, and that if she ever tried to show up at my door again with this nonsense, I would report her for harassment. She tried to protest, saying that she was only trying to help Lisa, but I wasn't going to tolerate it. I told her that it was her problem that she had been helping only one daughter all her life. I wasn't going to let her or Lisa destroy me. She stood there, stunned in silence, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I didn't give her a chance to recover. With one last withering look, I slammed the door in her face that I knew she would probably paint me as the villain to anyone who would listen, but I have decided to cut off all contact with them.